The Haywain Triptych is a large oil painting on oak panels by the Netherlandish artist Hieronymus Bosch. This multi-figured and perplexing work of art is a moral parable that exposes what is irredeemable in humanity, the sin of avarice. The ferociously acquisitive nature of man is laid bare for all to see. The central place of honor is given to a large hay wagon that moves along with its frantic train of followers. Peasants, thieves, quacks, fortune-tellers, nuns, monks, the Pope, the Emperor, the King, in a state of all against all, possessed by a maddening urge. The mound of hay represents the flesh, the transient aspect of all earthly things, upon which the desires of humanity are projected. People push and shove, fight and kill for a meager handful of hay. Alienated from God, they believe that earthly things are of ultimate value, blind to the fact that what the wagon offers is the world's empty promise, the grand delusion, the great deception. The wagon is pulled by grotesque-looking demons as it makes its way towards an inexorable catastrophe. The procession concludes on the right inner panel, in hell, where man is stripped naked and subject to the most horrific tortures. Bosch warns people of such fate if they do not change their ways. The triptych encourages awareness of one's actions, their possible consequences, and the necessity of redemption. The left inner panel describes the story of the origin of that necessity. The creation, the fall of man, and the expulsion of Adam and Eve from the Garden of Eden. To save people from hell, a vertical choice is offered: the meeting with Christ in heaven, whose central and ascended position reveals him as the one to be followed. The outer panels of the Haywain Triptych show a man on the road. He is an itinerant who personifies any gender, stage of life, or state of mind. A stranger on the earth who serves as a symbol of life as a pilgrimage towards God. The man stops being an active participant in the affairs of the world and takes to the road to become the errant seeker, the spiritual vagabond. Undeterred and one-pointed, he follows the example of Saint Anthony of Egypt and conducts his life with a view to attaining the peace of heaven at the end of his arduous journey. The weather-beaten face, the white stubble and hair, the weary eyes are expressive of worldly fatigue. He is tired of all the sinful games people play, their devious manner, the lack of accountability, the cruelty, the greed, the false joy, the laughter of the drunkard, the merriment of the foolish, the solicitations of the prostitute, the thirst for power, the bellicose nature of man, the deep and dark abyssal world he leaves behind. For long stretches on the road, he is compelled to follow on, nurturing the cosmic hope of redemption, the promise of deliverance. The road is a metaphor. One does not need to leave the confines of a prison cell to accomplish such a pilgrimage. What reaches the heights of heaven is the spirit. Even as the flesh rots and the world collapses. The walking stick brings to mind the one carried by Anthony of Egypt. It is a reminder of the dangers of the path and the necessity of constant vigilance. The stick represents the faith required to ward off the forces of evil. The dog does not only represent bodily harm. It is the constant menace of the devil along the way that tests the limits of mental and spiritual endurance. The basket he carries on his back is a reminder that the body, the burden of life, will always need provisions to continue in existence. Food, clothes, the tools of a tinker, or the trinkets of a peddler. Far off in the background, a gallows sits upon a hill. An execution is about to take place. A clear reference to Golgotha and the crucifixion of Jesus. The shepherds neglect their flocks. They make music and dance, disregarding their duties, showing lack of judgment and foresight. Three robbers have tied another traveler to a tree, stripping him as if fleecing a sheep. One who travels through life must reckon with the loss of material possessions. Nothing is under our control. We do not really own anything, and at any time things may slip through our fingers like sand. The wanderer follows a path that leads to a narrow bridge. The makeshift handrail and wobbly plank are nothing less than his way to everlasting life. To extricate himself from profane existence, the man must cross the bridge, venturing into the realm of the sacred. The precarious state of the bridge marks the danger of the fall at any stage of the journey. The triptych opens to reveal the narrative of human perdition. A panorama of misery and of the absurd enchantment people find in the vanities of the world. An unstoppable force drags itself horizontally, moving away from the garden of innocence, through the disgraceful state of present-day humanity, to end up in a place of retribution and eternal damnation. At the top of the left panel sits the figure of God, the creator of the world, above and at the beginning of everything, surrounded by the angels of light. The creation is not without its turmoil. The forces that rebelled against God have been expelled from heaven. Lucifer's army spills out of the clouds as a swarm of insect-like creatures falling down to earth, suffering their horrific mutations the closer they get to the ground. Down below, in front of the fountain of paradise, a regal, white-bearded god creates Eve out of Adam's rib. Adam and Eve had been assigned to live under God's law. But curiosity, secrecy, and rebellion, the seeds of unrighteousness, sprout almost surreptitiously. Deeply rooted, the weeds, the pods, the spiny thistle-like plant forms, the thorny vine, grow and harden and mature, just as evil grows and hardens and matures in the human heart. The middle ground of the panel shows the temptation of Adam and Eve by the devil. The snake has incarnated the evil one. It has grown a face to be all the more persuasive. With its darting eyes and silver tongue, wrapping its body firmly around the tree of knowledge of good and evil. The seductive power of the devil proves to be too strong, and so the first couple fall. Innocence is lost. As punishment for their disobedience, Adam and Eve are removed from the presence of God and from the bliss of His eternal idyll. The threat of violence is necessary to expel them from Eden. A belligerent archangel wields a flaming sword, guarding the stone gate of heaven. Eve turns away in pain and in shame, inconsolable as she looks upon the mortal world, the consequence of their transgression, the grim fury that makes up the central panel. In the mortal world, greed, temptation, deception, violence, and murder are out in the open. Individuals of every class cluster around a large hay wagon. A deluge of figures pouring out from all directions, heedless and headless, swept by the delirium of immediate gain. People throw themselves against the mountain of hay, desperately snatching handfuls from it. Handfuls of dust, the morsels of life. The wagon offers the abundance of the good harvest, fruit of the necessary hard work and self-reliance that profits humanity. The ostensibly good things of the world have been piled up into a heap. Hopes and dreams, promises and expectations. The stack of hay is there for the taking. The yellow color of the hay resembles gold, perceived as something of enduring value, worth fighting for, worth the misery and death it causes. The wagon resembles a triumphal chariot, returning in glory, plodding along the streets on rickety wheels to share with the people the great news of its earthly exploits. But underneath the masquerade, what triumphs is sin. A wooden door slides open, and a wild throng streams out of a mound of earth, like hungry termites that stop at nothing. Prongs and forks are used. Anything goes. A ladder is used to better get at the hay, a vain attempt, as its fate is to be crushed under the wheel. Hay is worth the taking of a life, to steal what someone else has gathered. A mindless struggle, the unyielding persistence of the mad, wearing people out, their strength sapped, their fury spent. They fall under the load and are trampled underfoot. At the pinnacle of the adoration of hay are the rulers of the world, the Pope, the Emperor, the King. They ride behind the wagon in dignified fashion, detached from the vulgar expressions of the brute. They do not reach out to grab the hay. The load is already in their possession. Despite their indifference, they covet as much and are as greedy, thirsting for power and prestige. Confident in their solemn course, they believe that life will only hand them justice, and that they have been allotted an auspicious place in heaven. How wrong they are. In the lower right corner, Franciscan nuns are busy gathering hay. Although the Franciscan order is sworn to poverty, the nuns show the same derangement for hoarding as the raving mob. One of the nuns, still attached to the world of the senses, flirts with a man who is puffing at his bagpipes. The confessor of the order, thick as an ox and as huge as their sack of hay, relaxes in a chair, finding inspiration at the bottom of the glass. Not all members of the clergy behave reprehensibly. Among the fray, a monk tries to break up a fight. A quack doctor has set up his stall, equipped with bottles of ointments and other embrocations. He examines the open mouth of a patient, relieving her of her toothache, as well as her money. The fake document gives him the semblance of authority enjoyed by legitimate practitioners. His banner shows a heart being pierced by worms, advertising his cure for sickness of the heart. Placed among the madness of the world is an island of peace. Two women are intimately posed. The figures allude to Mary and Elizabeth at the Visitation. In other works, the two women face each other in a similar manner, with Elizabeth indicating Mary's role as the holy vessel. The reading of the palm of the hand suggests a fortune-teller's knowledge of the future, any event of ultimate significance, such as a pregnancy. Unlike the delirious, bent-over figures that surround them, the two women stand elevated, pointed towards heaven. A blind man, carrying a baby on his back, needs the help of a walking stick and the guidance of a child. Many disabled people would resort to begging. They were marked as socially inferior and suspected of deceitfulness. A distinguished young couple, sitting comfortably atop the wagon, enjoy each other's company, absorbed in the pleasures of music. The demon at their side, blowing on his trumpet nose, celebrates the fact that it is the music of the flesh, diverting the young lovers from the straight path. The rustic couple behind them enjoy a moment of lustful play, to the delight of a peeping Tom behind the bush. With the self-assurance of youth, isolated from reality, the lovers disregard the miseries of the world. They are oblivious to the dangers of the journey, that their youthful beauty is short-lived and will soon fade, and that they are bound for hell. The lovers are positioned between the supplicating angel and the debauched demon. Good and evil mirror each other. The angel's gaze is fixed upwards towards Christ in the heavens. He prays to Jesus, bemoaning such great perdition. He is the only figure in the painting that notices the divine presence. The dancing demon points downwards and relishes the fact that humanity chooses to dance along with him. He is the swindler, the trickster demon, standing atop the mound of hay, used by Satan as bait to lure people into damnation. An owl, the ominous sign of evil, is perched atop the hay wagon, firmly attached to a branch. It cannot let itself loose, just as humanity is unable to break its chains, ensnared by the controlling power of greed. The image of the hay wagon is interchangeable, representing several things at once. It represents a tomb, warning the viewer of the spiritual death that ensues if he or she wishes to follow the wagon. The tomb from which Christ was risen is also symbolic of the triumph over death and the promise of eternal life. It represents Golgotha, as well as the hill from which Christ ascended, overcoming the world of flesh. The mound of hay resembles a flat-topped block, the place of sacrifice, the altar, on which the bread and the wine are placed. The kneeling angel prays as if partaking of the Mass. The hay wagon also relates to the procession of Corpus Christi, where believers gather to follow along, pray, sing, and honor the Blessed Sacrament. But what takes place here is a parade of folly. Above the wagon, Christ looks on from the clouds with a lost and resigned look. He is wearing the crimson robes of the Passion and displaying the stigmata. He despairs at the mass of humanity that mobs the hay, feeling that his wounds no longer have the power to redeem. He is the Christ who comes to renew his sacrifice in the Eucharist. And he is the Christ of the second coming, who will descend through the clouds, judging men according to whether they truly have become one with his body in the sacrament. But what he sees is an improper attitude of the heart. The load of hay so blindly pursued is an engagement in false worship of most serious consequences. A band of demonic creatures lead the procession towards its final destination, dragging the ungainly wagon at a steady pace as they leave behind the presence of the Christ. The maw of hell is hungry for new souls. Down its gullet go the avalanches of corpses, the landslides of bones. This is the fate of those who have willingly ensured their own passage, paid for by their transgressions and lack of repentance. And so they are driven along like cattle into the worst of nightmares. Bosch's hell is a place of silhouetted ruins against a burning sky, where the earth moves and floods over, where no real footing can be had. The ground threatens to collapse at any moment and swallow people down into its fiery pits. This is the upside-down world of bewilderment and pain, symbolized by its variety of tortures. The devils laugh at the futile struggles of the damned and crush any attempt at escaping. The beasts of hell are set loose and are sure to catch and rip apart any despairing fugitive. Satan scorns the supplications of the remorseful and thrusts the blades of guilt and shame into their hearts. The stigma of sin burns. The right panel is reminiscent of the literary work The Vision of Tyndale, a 12th century text reporting the otherworldly visions of an Irish knight after having gone into a deep dream journey through hell. In Bosch's Hell, a similar naked figure represents humanity in a series of tortures presented as vignettes. In one episode, Tundale was forced to drive a cow across a nail-studded bridge as punishment for having stolen a neighbor's cow. On the bridge, he encounters thieves who had stolen churches and had committed other acts of sacrilege. The man straddling an ox and tormented by a group of devils is evocative of that episode. The ox is an ancient symbol of redemption through sacrifice. Priestly vestments are laid on the animal's back. The helmet, worn by the soldiers of Christ, covers the man's entire head. He is kept in the dark, led on in a fruitless search. The man represents clerics who have made a mockery of their duties and have profaned the host. He is crossing a bridge, carrying empty receptacles, among which is the chalice of the Eucharist. The demons are busy with Satan's architectural projects, the building of the towers of hell. A demon goes up a ladder to take fresh mortar to diabolical bricklayers on the scaffolding. A beam is raised with a pulley. This is the Tower of the Lost, built with bricks supplied by the misdeeds of mortals. Each brick a sin committed, the infernal counterpart to the golden bricks of the houses of the just, of St. Gregory's vision of heaven, where each brick was a good deed performed from a soul on earth. The tower parallels the Tower of Hay that ungodly sinners worshipped in life, and parodies the Tower of Babel, with which man wanted to conquer the gates of heaven. Pride and arrogance of which they are now convicted. The tortures continue. The devil prescribes the slow mastication of the genitals as the appropriate fate of the lustful. A man is skinned like a rabbit, hanging upside down from a pike, his entrails spilling out of his body. Each sin in life guarantees a corresponding punishment, the final judgment appropriate to the judged. The Haywain Triptych is a product of an end-of-the-world mindset and of a linear perspective of divine history. It offers, by means of its tragicomic didacticism, only one way out of the human predicament, an opportunity to transcend the gravitational forces of earthly existence and their all-too-powerful pull into a retributive underworld. It assigns free agency to humanity and marks ignorance as being deliberate and intrinsically evil. The triptych has been compared to the tablet of Sebes, on which the whole of human life, with its dangers and temptations, was symbolically represented, intended to show that only the proper development of our mind and the possession of real virtues can make us truly happy. The hay motif, with its connotations of flesh, greed, and vanity, was widespread in the late Middle Ages. Bosch reformulates this figure of speech, exposing the futility of avarice and the certainty of its result. Not only the death of the body, but also, and most seriously, the death of the soul. Unlike the merry simpletons who are comfortably transported downstream to their perdition in the ship of fools, the Haywain is loaded with a more sinister connotation. the tragic belief in the perennial value of earthly things. But earthly things, like the hay, are consumed, are burned, dry up, or rot. Dissolution is inevitable.